So today's video was spurred by an article that I read about happiness and achievement in students and how those two things go together, and how some measures in the industry are beginning to look at psychological data on students and from parents, and not just the traditional verbal and quantitative constructs that we usually measure. So, since the beginning of formal educational measurement, we've focused on these two big pillars, verbal and quantitative, both of which fall into the cognitive skills and standards bucket, and our curriculum is pretty much structured around those things. But the more we sort of evolve as a society, the more we're beginning to realize that psychological well-being and mental health play into achievement as well. And I will make sure that I link to the article that spurred this video, and also there's an awesome infographic that goes along with it that shows, based on some past PISA data, how happiness and achievement distribute themselves across all the different nations in the world. It's really interesting, and by chance, Singapore seems to be the place where students are the happiest and the highest achieving. So just an interesting note from that article, but it made me begin to think about, and it's something that's been on my mind for a long time, but it made me really begin to think about having the discussion with people about where does this fit in? How does this come into educational measurement? The article mentioned the fact that emotional well-being and self-efficacy and all these things are actually a better predictor of GPA and college persistence than the ACT or the SAT. So, just in the fact that these things are a good predictor means that this is probably another dimension in student performance that we've not traditionally measured for all students. We have for maybe the special ed population and maybe the super high flyers, but for all those kids in the middle, we've never really looked at mental health. And so some of the things that are starting to come out, and I'll link this as well, there's a great TED Talk right now on grit, and how one study is beginning to look at grit and motivation, and how that plays into student achievement much more strongly than IQ does, which is interesting because IQ is typically what we use to identify students as gifted and talented, but it turns out it could be a combination of factors, and it could have more to do with grit and motivation than it does with IQ, which I personally kind of love, but I have my own biases there. So those are some of the things that people are beginning to look at, grit and motivation. I'm going to kind of read off of a list of other things to think about. Impulse control, self-efficacy, emotional regulation, gratitude, optimism, resilience, hope, happiness, and safety. These are all new constructs that are emerging and have begun to be measured in different places, some globally and some in California, on different types of surveys that go along with educational measurements. So those are some of the topics that we're beginning to think about in relation to student achievement. One of the interesting things that has come along recently that may confound this, though, is the opposition to the Common Core. There is, a strong group, a strong conservative movement against the Common Core, and what has been coming along with that is a concern for the data and privacy rights of students. Those two issues keep getting lumped together, even though they're really pretty separate issues. And one of the problems with that is that people, in an earnest and much needed effort to specify what we are able to do and not able to do legally with student information, some of the clauses that I've seen limit your ability, or our ability as federal, state, and private assessment entities to look at psychological factors or to collect psychological data about students. And I'm just not sure where that comes from, to be honest. I guess maybe I have rose-colored glasses on. I feel like psychological well-being is such a hot, interesting new topic that could lead to some incredible education reforms, that could lead to happier, higher-achieving students. So I think that these data protection efforts are good because seems like FERPA can't really keep up with all of the pace of technology changing. So states have had to kind of step in and say, this is what we would like to see happen or not happen with our student data. So those are reasonable efforts, but we need to be careful that we don't overly limit ourselves in what we can collect on students, because we may hinder progress by doing that. Another interesting topic that comes up when you think about this is it overstepping? I tend to think that it's not, but is it overstepping? Do people feel like it's overstepping to look at psychological data on their students, on their children? Do parents feel like that's a violation of their privacy? Also, is it the role of the school to track and intervene in these types of things? I'm not sure that it is entirely. I'm not sure that it's something that the school even has the capability to completely reform without changes at home as well. But I don't think that should stop us from beginning to look at these issues, gather data on it, do the research, and see if we can find some constructive interventions to improve emotional well-being and mental health for students. Thirdly, I'll mention this. Another contentious topic is gun violence in schools. And there have been massive gun control efforts as a response to those, but as someone who is educated in mental health, I've always kind of not taken issue with the gun control efforts, but thought that energy was misguided. I think that if we begin to look more into mental health in the general population, not just in the super high flyers and in the really low performers, we might have the potential to get our hands around really scary issues with certain students before they escalate to that point. So those are just some of my thoughts on mental health and educational assessment, how they really go together. I don't know exactly how yet. I don't think anybody does, but it's a topic worthy of discussion. And I think that there is an exciting future in this field, and it's one of the reasons that when I went back to graduate school, I decided not to go to a purely educational school, but to go to a school of psychology to study measurement, because I know a lot about education, but I want to know more about all of the psychological processes and the neurocognitive functioning that go along with all of these purely curricular topics, because obviously there's an interplay there. So those are my thoughts. Thanks for listening, and please leave comments if you have thoughts on this topic as well.